Okay, let's go.
I'm Nicole Lee, and welcome back to You Never Know, where we talk about life, career, change, and the stories of people who have taken the unconventional road and embraced the unknowns. So many of us see life as a series of carefully curated steps that is part of this plan that we can control. Today's guest knows this well in both his professional and personal life. He has built a legal career across continents, from top-tier law firms in New York, London, and Hong Kong to global firms like Dentsu and Yahoo, and now plays a key role as Group General Counsel of one of the world's largest combat sports organizations, One Championship. But beyond all the titles and the deals, he's someone I know personally who knows what it means to navigate life's uncertainties and to transform from within. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Will Finn to You Never Know. Will, I'm so grateful that you've agreed to share your story today.
Thank you for such an incredibly kind introduction. It's interesting to hear another person talk in those terms about me, because I don't really think of myself as a sort of successful career professional. I think I've just always just done my thing and landed where I've landed. So yeah, thank you for the introduction.
You're welcome. And that's such a profound reflection as well, because that shows that you've grown. And perhaps those labels don't really matter to you as much anymore. So we can talk more about that later. But I wanted to start with how we met.
Yeah. So, I feel, so blessed to have met you, Nicole. And I think really it was kind of synchronistic. I sort of up until last year was not really a kind of avid user of LinkedIn. But as a result of my own kind of health struggles last year, which I'm sure we'll talk about, I was on LinkedIn a bit more, and I noticed a few of your own kind of reflections and posts on the platform sort of midway through last year. And I guess I really admired your courage and authenticity and vulnerability, and sharing your own sort of professional journey and challenges you'd faced along the way. And I guess I sensed that there was something much deeper going on with you. I could read between the lines of your posts. And so I remember reading one of your posts and was curious about your background, and just happened to take a quick look at your profile, and you'd sort of announced that you were putting a community event together. And I thought, well, if there are like-minded people who are going to be attending this event, then I might like to attend too. So I think I reached out to you, and that's how we met.
Yeah, that's so cool and synchronistic. So many people who have come into my life, especially in the past year and a half, have been coming in for a reason. And sometimes I don't know the reason yet, but definitely you are one of them. And I know that you reached out the day before the event, and I didn't even check your profile. I just saw that, you were at One Championship, and I used to do Muay Thai and boxing at Evolve as well. And I was like, yeah, cool. Please come, right? And the next day we had the event. And you showed up, and I was really glad that you did, because some people say that they will, but they don't. And you showed up, and I was really happy. And we had this group sharing where everyone went around to sort of describe their life situation, the biggest challenges. And I think you were next to me. And that's when you opened up about having cancer. And I think I got emotional, and quite a few people around the table as well. And I was thinking to myself, you have cancer, you're in pain. Why would you come for the event? And it was a question that was always on my mind. What was your emotional state of being at that point in time that sort of also made you want to come and share?
Yeah, goodness me. What a big question. I think cancer sort of first entered my consciousness long before I was diagnosed with cancer, about a year earlier. I haven't told too many people this, but about a year earlier, I had sort of a false alarm. I'd gone on holiday in New Zealand and sorry.
It's okay.
Excuse me.
It's okay.
And thought I might have cancer at the time when I was on holiday.
That was
in New Zealand in 2023.
Okay.
And so went to a doctor in Queenstown, New Zealand, and had a few checks and had that kind of few days there where I thought I might be sick. And it's really quite a fearful and terrifying experience when you think you might have a serious illness like cancer. And but I think what happened was it was a massive blessing to have that kind of enter my consciousness at the time, because it kind of prepared me for what was to come a year later. So thankfully I sort of went through some ultrasounds and scans at the time and found out that I didn't have cancer at the time, but it set me on this path. So that year I ended up volunteering with the Child Cancer Foundation in Singapore. I happened across a book by an American psychiatrist who had set up cancer support groups in the United States in, I think, the 70s. And just sort of, I started to gather this general awareness around cancer, and it was a massive blessing, because when I was diagnosed a year later, it was almost like I'd already sort of dealt with it.
Wow.
So it was kind of an incredible life experience to go through. And I think to answer your question, sorry, I'm being a bit long-winded. When I was diagnosed, I knew inherently that it was a nudge to live more authentically. So I had this career which you described, which I guess I've been moderately successful at, but I didn't feel like it was aligned to who I was as a person. And so, oddly enough, when I actually received the diagnosis, I knew that there was a much deeper purpose to the diagnosis. It was so obvious to me. And sort of from that point onwards, I started opening up to people, sharing my sort of true self with people. And it was so beautiful because it encouraged other people to share their true selves and be open and, just create some beautiful space. And so I think that's what kind of nudged me to come to your community event, because I could see your courage and your vulnerability. And really that was the message from my illness was you really have to live authentically. It was just so obvious to me. So that's kind of how I came to your event. Yeah.
You're making me emotional already. I resonate a lot with it, especially the part where you talked about the knowing that when something happens to you, that it kind of happened for you. And only you will know what it means, not exactly at that point, but there's a knowing that it's meant to happen for a reason. I wanted to ask, and it's so incredible that you actually kind of knew before you were diagnosed that it was going to enter your life. and it must have happened for a reason too.
Mm.
What made you in the first place feel that you might have cancer?
Yeah, so it was a really wild journey, and what it truly taught me was that everything is interconnected, and all of these seemingly disparate occurrences that happened for about a year, suddenly the moment I was actually diagnosed, all made total sense to me. And so, yeah, I literally just got off a flight from Singapore to Christchurch and then to Queenstown, checked into a hotel with my family, and just noticed a lump in my lower abdomen.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got 2 young children, so it was, really scary as a parent to think, oh my goodness, I might have a potentially terminal illness. And yeah, as I say, I was able, after a few days, 3 or 4 days, to get it checked and get some comfort, but it was a scary few days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so that happened the year before, and then a year later, I just went and did a standard routine annual health check.
Mm-hmm.
And again, Nicole, I was just so incredibly blessed because I arrived at the health check and was assigned a very warm, affable male doctor, and we just immediately struck up this beautiful rapport, and it's not like something I've really experienced before. So we were sort of just chatting about life in New Zealand during my consultation at the end of all the routine checks. And just sort of as an afterthought, he said to me, oh, there's this one blood test that's not included in your blood work, and I have a feeling we should add it. That was what he said to me. And the health screening was part of my corporate health package. So I sort of naturally said, oh, okay, how much will it be? And he said, oh, $50. And I said, yeah, sure. Okay, let's add it. So, and little did I know that quite possibly saved my life. So 4 days later, I was at home in the afternoon, and the phone rang, and it was this doctor. And I thought to myself, oh, this can't be good, because normally you wouldn't expect to hear from the doctor so soon. And sure enough, he called and said, yeah, your beta HCG, which is actually a marker that's more common for women in pregnancy, is absolutely through the roof and would seriously indicate that you're likely to have cancer. So yeah, it was a wild journey from my first false alarm to actually being diagnosed. Yeah.
We talked about it over coffee before. Do you think the cancer could have been a sign or a manifestation of something else bigger and deeper? And I ask you this because we've talked about it, and also because health scares are one of the biggest fears that people have these days, especially cancer. But I wanted to go a bit deeper into a more profound perspective from you about where you think the source of this could be.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I've been very blessed and fortunate to have been on my own sort of healing journey for probably about 7 years. And, I deeply believe through my own experience and growth that we all carry, what you might call complex trauma within us. Most people think of trauma as a one-time event, a car accident or, some extremely traumatic moment in their lives, whereas I tend to think of it that the vast majority of people have continuing events in their past that sort of added up create some sort of traumatic nervous system response. And so I'd sort of been dealing with that in different domains of my life for a number of years. And I think when the cancer was diagnosed, and in my case it was a fairly large tumor in my abdomen, I really believed that it was just sort of trapped energy, and that it was really my body finally wanting to expel the energy. And I think to add to that, what was really interesting to me was the tumor was compromising my left kidney. And, you know, according to certain traditions, the kidney is sort of the source of life force. And it was kind of like, to me, I was like, oh, wow, like my kind of energetic life force has been compromised and it's time to fix that. So I was never angry or bitter when I was diagnosed. I could always see a much higher purpose to my diagnosis right from the beginning. In fact, I kind of perversely was almost thankful for the diagnosis. Yeah.
That's so introspective. And it's something that a lot of people may not have realized yet in terms of how so much of our past and unhealed traumas actually are manifested then through illnesses and anxieties and ADHDs and that kind of thing as well. And I'm not a doctor, we're not doctors, right? But from your experience and from my experience as well, so much of that actually then manifests physically in a negative way. But it's so profound that because you were on your healing journey, you kind of knew that it was a necessary part of your growth and of your healing. But that's so difficult to do because it's so painful too physically. Tell me more about how going through that physical pain as well and how you overcame it really helped you through that transformation as well. I know it's so counterintuitive, or it doesn't really make sense to many people. Like, how could it be? Because most people would be like, this can't be possible.
Yeah, so the way that I think about it is cancer came to crack me open. There's a sort of spiritual guru who's inspired me, Ram Dass, and he talks about this concept of fierce grace, of challenging things happen in your life, of suffering coming in your life, but actually there's a purpose to that suffering, and if you can see that purpose, you can grow and expand from it. And that was really my experience. It cracked me open. It cracked open my authenticity. I started having the most open dialogues and loving dialogues with so many people close to me. I was able to shed my inhibitions about showing my true self, because I think when you're faced with your own potential mortality, you just realize that being anything other than your true self is a total waste of time, and caring what other people think. I remember the first kind of message that came to me was, well, stop caring what other people think, because I obviously knew I was going to lose my hair through the chemo. And the week before I was going in for chemo, I sort of said to myself, I need to find someone who will cut my hair. And just sort of through synchronicity, an old friend of mine who's a Buddhist monk here in Singapore was running a retreat the weekend immediately before my chemo was to begin. And he said to me, well, just come to the retreat. It's a one-day silent retreat. And no need to pay. And I've actually got some monks in from Thailand, and they'll cut your hair for you. And so, I'd gone through this kind of dilemma of how am I going to do this in a way that doesn't scare my children. And then suddenly kind of this manifested, and in the most beautiful way. And my children came in the afternoon and watched. And I remember realizing that day that, I was going to need to stop caring what other people thought of me, because it was going to be an interesting journey ahead. But then I realized that that's actually just a metaphor for life itself, that, sort of liberation comes through finally not caring what other people think and just expressing yourself totally authentically. And so really cancer just, cracked me wide open.
I love that. And I think so many people need to hear that too, because so many people are going through a difficult time, whether it's health related, relationships related, work related, and sometimes we blame ourselves or even blame other people for the things that happen to us when it seems so negative. But what you've described as well is also how you view a situation and what you perceive it can help you with and it can do for you in order for you to be the best version of yourself or a better version of yourself through this ordeal or this challenge that came into your life. And so that's a big one. And we talked about it, how the vibration of authenticity and being yourself is so underrated. Because a lot of us in, corporate institutions and, big careers are often, wearing, this mask that people want us to wear, or you think people want you to wear in order for you to actually progress in life. You are a lawyer. And I know that you mentioned earlier that may not have, it isn't really a sort of a big part of your identity anymore. But if we bring it back from the 4D or 5D to 3D, being a lawyer is still something that many people aspire to be. Was that something that you wanted to be all along?
I think we can only ever make decisions from the relative level of awareness that we have at the time. And when I was 18 years old and made the decision to go to law school, I had, the level of awareness of an 18-year-old who had just finished high school and was deeply conditioned by societal expectations and familial expectations, and was really just on that path of ambition and accomplishment and seeking to learn and I guess set myself up for life. And I'd had family members who had been lawyers. An uncle of mine had been a Court of Appeal judge in New Zealand, and my father was a lawyer, and it seemed like a sensible career path. And I think probably it was a sensible career path, and it's given me a heck of a lot. But I do also think that the idea that we make a decision at sort of 18 years old that is supposed to endure for the rest of our lives is a really kind of misguided decision. And what I'm deeply passionate about is sort of trying to solve that, because I'm 42 now and I see so many sort of corporate professionals who made that exact same decision for, inner reasons as well as external reasons, and sort of climb the ranks and realize that perhaps they're not as fulfilled or satisfied as they'd like to be. And that deeply pains me, Nicole, because these are people who have the most to offer. They really do. They have the most to offer society. They really have the inner potential to self-actualize. So turning a sort of situation of malaise into a situation of contribution is something I'm really passionate about. And I guess I lean on that from my own experience of being a lawyer. I mean, I've been very fortunate that I've had largely fulfilling roles, and I have an enjoyable role at one championship, as you touched on, but it doesn't mean that this isn't an issue, and this issue's become much, much more audible to me as a result of my cancer. I think the cancer is just sort of, it puts a magnifying glass on any areas of misalignment and sort of makes you want to shift them. Yeah.
There's so many things that you said that I really resonate with and that I really love. And I have that same passion too, right? I think the first one that stood out to me was we think that so many things and the decisions that we made in life are permanent. Like you said, it was something that at that time was the best decision for you, but it need not mean that that decision stays with you till you're 28, 38, 48, 58. And that so many of us need to realize that we have the choice to make a new decision for the new version of ourselves today or the one that we want to be. So having that introspection, reflection, or the unexpected event that happened in your life that made you say, okay, that's not me anymore. Or the second observation is, that's no longer all of me. And that a part of me is someone that wants to be fulfilled in a different way too. So many people need to realize that in their own way too.
I think everybody consciously or subconsciously, and probably the vast majority on a subconscious level, because they probably haven't brought conscious awareness to it, really just want to integrate who they are into what they do. And obviously in the corporate world, and as you touched on, a lot of us wear these kind of corporate hats.
Yeah.
And I think that can lead to immense dissatisfaction, because it's like the moment you kind of, it's not literal anymore in the post-COVID age, but kind of walk into the office, you're sort of someone else. And, you know, that continuing year-on-year misalignment between who you are and what you do on a day-to-day basis is, in my view, incredibly unhealthy, and just can lead to massive existential anxiety and malaise. But, you know, on the other hand, I don't think it necessarily requires one to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I've talked with plenty of corporate professionals about this, and they say to me, oh yeah, but you know, my sunk cost is too high. I'm 20 years into this career. I might be a MD at a bank or a partner at a law firm or whatever. And I think part of it is about reframing that paradigm and saying, well, you don't necessarily have to do that. You just need to get in touch with your inner self and listen to what your inner self wants. And it might be that you can just spend an hour or two a week doing something else, you know. Maybe it's teaching someone, maybe it's guiding someone, whatever that may be. But the energy that a person can extract from starting to engage in pursuits that align with them, their deeper selves, they can actually then pour back into their day job, and it makes their day job become more satisfying.
Yeah.
And they can sort of transfer those skills and that awareness into it as well.
No, I fully agree. Not everyone has to just quit their jobs. Although sometimes it is necessary. And it's a two-way thing. I liked what you said about finding yourself so that a part of your life can be doing something else that either gives back or is representative of a more authentic part of you while still keeping your job. But on the other side, I think more and more companies as well sort of need to realize that that's what makes their staff happy and fulfilled. It's not just giving them more money, you know, or promotions, because most of the time people don't just leave because of money. They leave because of something deeper, right? And I think it is changing slowly. It is slowly changing in terms of the realizations of the individual and the realizations of the corporate as well, to somewhat meet in the middle, because then we start to see society really progressing and having more empathy and being part of this beautiful collective that really wants to help each other rather than kill each other. And I think that can be something really beautiful.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Nicole. I mean, I had this realization recently in my own life experience that oftentimes we treat our to use a crass term, our trade as our calling, and we expect that our trade will fulfill us in a way that only a calling can. So we attach these really unrealistic and false expectations onto our day job and say, oh, why isn't being a lawyer filling my cup? And sure, it does for, maybe 5 or 10% of people. And I greatly, greatly admire those people who do find their bliss through being a lawyer in my case. But for the vast majority of people, it doesn't. But I don't think the problem is that. I think the problem is that people have unrealistic expectations about what they're going to get out of that. So if you can actually reframe it and say, this is my trade, there's a necessary part in my overall human experience of having this trade. It puts food on the table. But there's this other thing called my calling, which I can search within myself for and pursue that and pursue it, full time or part time or on the side. But that calling is something that only one can find within themselves. It's not something that an external job or position or title or salary will ever give them. It's not possible because that can only come from within. And I think that's a really important realization for people to come to, that there is a place for your trade, but don't treat your trade like it's supposed to fill your cup, because it won't. It by definition it can't.
No, that's a very real perspective and a realization as well that I've had too, I was like that before, and I've also had those expectations about my job, having to fill my cup. And I think there is still a place, of course, for some people to find that intersection between your calling and your craft and your career. And that would be the most beautiful thing, if you could actually have that intersection. But it's such a big realization to come to realize that your job may not fill your cup entirely. And that part of the cup in which your job doesn't fill it is especially important too. But that part about finding that within you, that's a difficult one. I mean, because you're so absorbed in your job that sometimes, actually not sometimes, a lot of times, you need the space within you to actually find what it is that really drives you and gives you purpose, right? And I think that's where a lot of people who are running on the treadmill in the rat race need to realize as well that sometimes you do need to step out of the place and the environment that you're in to actually go within to find out who you are.
When you talk about this, I just feel very compelled to mention that being lost is an absolutely necessary part of the journey. And it's an uncomfortable part of the journey.
Yeah.
But for any true growth or transition to happen, you have to accept that there's going to be a period where you don't like where you currently are, but you don't really know what the next step is or how to get there. And this period of being lost could be months or it could be years. And on some level for me, I would say it's probably been about 5 years. And going full circle in our conversation, the cancer almost was the end of being lost for me. But I think accepting the discomfort of being lost is an important part of it. And I think even before you even get there, having the courage to face yourself Viktor Frankl said, those who can't find meaning in their lives distract themselves with pleasure. And I've just seen it so often that, people get to a point, and either consciously or unconsciously, they aren't really satisfied with what they're doing in this context in their jobs, but they're not willing to face themselves. They're not willing to answer the hard questions. I was talking to a friend about it the other day, and he really profoundly said, well, it's the people who resist asking the hard questions who tend to end up the most successful by societal standards, because it's that inner seeking that shifts us on the path we're kind of supposed to be on. But it takes a huge amount of courage and a huge amount of bravery and a huge amount of discomfort. And I totally have compassion and understanding for people who don't wish to go there, because it's really uncomfortable. As I say, it takes a lot of courage.
100% true. 100% true that you distract yourself with pleasure or noise. And I was doing my solo podcast just a month ago and saying that you harness your power in the silence, not the noise. And it's so true. And so I completely resonate with what you said, even though a lot of times when you're deep in the rut, that being lost or being distracted or trying to numb the pain with something that's less healthy is sometimes part of the process, right? I think a lot of us have gone through it, myself included as well. But it's the ability to choose different, to choose not to drink as much, not to go on social media as much, not to whatever it is, right? So that you can have the space to look within. And I must say, Will, like, you're one of the few examples as well of people who are more masculine, who have had the courage to look within as well. I mean, as a man, if you think that is actually harder to go through.
Well, how to unpack that? I think there are a few levels to that. I think I've always been an incredibly introspective person and always asked these big questions about the meaning of life and what this is all about. But to your point on kind of gender inclinations, 100%. I think it's a function of men, particularly in my generation, growing up in the 70s, 80s, being brought up to not cry, to not express emotion, to not feel safe or allowed to express their emotions, which ultimately leads to them being unable to express their emotions, which ultimately leads to them being disconnected from who they are. I mean, I was at a point 7 or 8 years ago where if someone asked me how I was feeling, I could probably only label 2 emotions. I could probably only say I was happy or angry, probably. I really had no ability, and if you can't label your emotions, you can't really connect with who you are. So I think just by virtue of how we're brought up and how society operates, women tend to be much more in touch with themselves and as a result are able to kind of connect with themselves. Whereas unfortunately that tends not to be the case so much with men. And I've noticed it as well on my journey that it's can be challenging at times to kind of find other men who are spiritually inclined because men tend not to share so readily. Yeah.
What you said resonated with me as a woman as well, actually. And then I realized that perhaps it's not about gender, but how you grew up too. Because I didn't have the emotional vocabulary to describe what I was going through either. And see, sometimes we assume that women may be more in touch with their emotions, or we assume that men aren't. But I think a large part of it is how you grew up and whether you were used to expressing your thoughts and your emotions and your feelings, and how that response was to you. How was it like for you growing up? Because we haven't yet talked about where you're from. And I know that, you probably get different responses to where you're from and how you grew up, and there are certain assumptions as well. Where are you from, Will, and how do you grow up?
Yeah, so I'm from Auckland, New Zealand. Auckland's a small city by global standards. Probably when I grew up, there were about 1 to 1.5 million people living in Auckland, and I'm the youngest of 4 boys. So I had 3 older brothers, and we were a very kind of outdoorsy, sporty family. And so it was very kind of masculine, obviously, and it was really all about what you could do on the sports field, and had a happy childhood. But as I've grown older, I can see I also had quite a few challenges growing up as well. But I think in a large family environment like that, and being the youngest, oftentimes I probably developed strategies to cope and survive that probably involved me expressing sort of how I was feeling, which, many people do that, and it's a perfectly logical and acceptable coping mechanism that a child might adopt in a family environment just to get by. And I think as you get older, you hopefully bring awareness to it and change how you respond to different situations. Yeah.
The first thing that strikes me is that despite different countries and different nationalities and races, that there are actually so many similarities and commonalities among people than we think. I mean, there are differences too, but what you said, about these subtle nuances of how you grew up and how you respond to it, because you could be growing up in the same family but having totally different experiences from the other 3 brothers that you have, and it could affect all of them so differently, even though you had the same parents and growing up in the same house. And that applies to every family around the world too, regardless of your circumstances and where you come from. That's the first thing that struck me.
100%. In fact, I would say that's almost certainly the case in every family, because the circumstances of the caregivers, the parents, are different from one child to another. The dynamics between siblings, the dynamics between siblings and their parents, all of these things are different. So I would say it's almost impossible to think that every child in a family would have the same experience, because it by definition can't be the same experience. Yeah.
I wanted to touch a little bit on your career, because it's so difficult to get into the top tier law firms, which you did, and then you decided to move to the advertising industry and then the sports industry. What were the biggest changes for you and the biggest lessons moving from private practice to being general counsel in a sports industry?
I've been very blessed to be exposed to the premier law firms in the world, and then some major corporations as well. And I guess through that journey, I could see fairly quickly when I was working in New York, working very, very hard, sort of 7 days a week, that wasn't a life I wished to have forever. I didn't meet a single partner at any of these law firms whose lives I wish to emulate. So I knew that my life as a private practice lawyer wasn't going to be something that would carry on for long. So I was fortunate enough to get a role with a client with Yahoo back in the days when Yahoo was a well-known internet company, and moved in with them. But sort of to accelerate the story a little bit, I'd been working in Singapore for a few years with Dentsu and was kind of climbing the ladder and realized that I wanted to be a general counsel. But I don't know, I had this realization that I wanted to be a general counsel of a global company, and there weren't really many Singapore, particularly in the sort of startup scene, Singapore companies that were truly global. And I'd sort of interviewed and had discussions with more local Singapore startups that had operations across Southeast Asia. And then one day I got a call about this role with One Championship. And I remember meeting the founder, Chartery, and we were talking about the role. And I said, about a year ago, I said that I wanted to be the general counsel of a global company that was originated in Singapore. It was really synchronistic, and then that happened. So yeah, I've always found working kind of in the business, trying to build a company to be much more fulfilling than working in private practice and advising clients from the outside. And yeah, it's been a really fulfilling journey. And I think what I'm learning more now is that the skills that I've learned trying to help build a business at One are really going to be immensely transferable and useful for me in years to come. And I wouldn't have had those skills sort of if I were pigeonholed in private practice or in a small specialized team in a big multinational corporation. So yeah, it's kind of hindsight's 2020 because I'm now starting to look back and think, wow, like this exposure I've had is really helpful to me.
Yeah. I'm sure a lot of people will ask you, which one do you think is better, practice or big corporations? But like what you mentioned, every role and every change in your career serves its purpose. And sometimes you never know actually like what that role or what that purpose, or not just in career, right, in your life, right, why you ran into someone, why you know what I mean, like. So I think that what you described earlier was very reflective of what life is about and how you make the best out of the changes that you've made too.
Yeah, I think it can be very challenging and difficult at the time to try and make sense of this tapestry. I think in many cases it's just beyond the realms of our limited human minds to understand why things happen the way they do. And I think perhaps as you get a bit older and you get a few more scars, you start to connect the dots and say, oh, wow, I can see why this happened or why that happened. But I think when you're in the thick of it, it can be really challenging to understand. And I think really, there's no wrong step because every step is a step of growth and a step of learning, and every step gives you what you need at the time. And I think every step kind of is really reflective of your own level of awareness at that particular time. So I do believe that you get what you need at the time, whether it's the work experience you have or in other domains. It all is truly there to serve you. And going back to my cancer experience, I believe that too. I mean, all of these things are ultimately there to serve you, to help you grow, to help you realize things about yourself that you might not otherwise have realized. I mean, that's certainly how I look at work and how I look at life. Yeah.
I think we're running out of time, but I would love to ask you if you were to tell the audience one or two messages based on your experiences in your life, in your health, in your relationships, in your career, what would you say to them?
Yeah, thanks for such a profound question. I think going along with the theme of what we've discussed today, I would just encourage people to truly stop caring what other people think. Because when you do that, when you start acting with total authenticity, what happens is the people who resonate with you will come to you and find you. And the people who don't resonate with you won't. And they're both perfect outcomes, because you actually don't want the people who don't resonate with you to be around you. You don't want that at all. So it's immensely liberating the moment you shed your concerns around what other people think and just start living truly to yourself. And I would just encourage your audience to seek to be as authentic as they can in the way that they live, because it's immensely gratifying. And as I put on a LinkedIn post last year, as Carl Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And I really believe that. I think it's incumbent on us to be our authentic selves, because in being our authentic selves, you open up the space for others to be their authentic selves too. I think that's just a fundamental life lesson that I had the privilege of learning through, particularly my cancer journey, but I guess my career more generally as well.
That's so beautiful. And actually, that's our purpose in life, right? To be who we truly are. And it sounds easy, but it is actually so difficult to do if you haven't yet acknowledged what happened to you, if you haven't yet let go of expectations from others, because not caring about what other people think about you is a huge one. And it's something that I took a long time to let go of. I wouldn't say that I've completely let go of it all, but I've come a long way. But it is something that's so big and so difficult to do, yet so important in your life. So not care about what other people think. Be your authentic self. Be true to who you are. And in that way, you will live the life that you choose to live. Thank you so much, Will.
Thank you, Nicole. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's really great speaking to you. Thank you so much for sharing and being vulnerable